So we're still walking. I did something a little different today. My son left some, my older boy, he left some Quaker Oats, sugary apple flavor, Quaker Oats instant packets. And the fat that's in those is just completely negligible. Like, it's not going to make you fat. In fact, the fiber really just draws out the fat, and it works in a very different way. It's a very slow release. Of course, when you instantize the oats, it changes the complexity of that, the complex carbohydrates. But that's the perfect thing to take when you're exercising, when you're oxidizing. Because as you oxidize, you're going to be burning a little bit of fat, right? Not as much as you want to. This is why your walks or your long, slow distance cycling, that you can do on a bike, you just stay on that bike. You stay on that bike for like 3 hours. You don't go off of mileage. Let people pass you up. Feel it. Stay in your own space. I'm trying to do more videos based around just the practicum of what I know, what I've been middle to high expert on, right? Probably 6.7 to 7.2 out of 10. When I say 10, I'm talking about some of the most world-renowned exercise physiologists would probably peak past a 10. Even like a 10 would be the highest educated. Like, I've had doctors working under me who admittedly knew less. Like, they're like, look, I'm really floating on my doctoral, licensing, where people are impressed by that. But then I'm also a personal trainer, but I don't proclaim to, I don't even have a doctorate in this particular field. So, right. Or people that I've trained with that would come asking me questions that had master's degrees, and they're just hiding behind their degree, but they don't really produce anything, right? And then you get these people who have those, and then they just go do a pile of steroids, right? And they're able to understand how to always be appearing as if they're at the cutting edge, but they don't really understand anything. They weren't in their garage doing the hard work when they were teenagers. They didn't go from 130 pounds up to 195 pounds of rock solid muscle when they were teenagers like I did, naturally. Like, if YouTube existed then, I would have a lot of followers, and I'd be able to help a lot of people my age, at that time. But I remember those times, and the weird thing is at 56 years old, I'm kind of going through the same thing. What I found is carnivore gives you a really good base, right? It keeps all your muscles in check. You're able to do quite a bit of working out without getting routinely sore. I would oftentimes work the same muscle groups day in and day out on carnivore. The same, like, it would be equated more toward an endurance type athlete, right? But the endurance side is the diet, right? So your body feels like it's going through a fucking marathon every day. And I haven't subsided on my walking. The biggest thing that I advocate, ironically, and this is something that I discovered early on and didn't necessarily apply it, but always kept it on the back burner until one day I go, you got to be doing this. And it is Steve Reeves' approach, right? But also Jack LaLanne, but Steve Reeves' approach. Like, people are looking at Larry Scott like, wow, that's really impressive. But when you look at the master of aesthetics, where you didn't need to have a 20-inch arm, right? Because the 20-inch arm eclipsed and over exaggerated the rest of the body, right? I'm not putting Larry Scott down. I mean, that was a really impressive physique he got, right? But Steve Reeves exemplified this master of genetics, right? And holistic living. And the most they were doing back in that day and understanding what to do was they had to do a lot of metabolic eating, a lot of growth hormone type eating, a lot of sleeping, a lot of heavy duty training, right? But they were, in essence, flitting back and forth, and they all knew it between like a steak and eggs type diet, right? Type diet, I'm saying. Because you could do this with fish, depends on the tropical region you're from. And, you know, that's what really brought, what's his face? I'm picturing him. The, the Bermuda, the Cuban. God, I'm spacing out. All the blood is going down into my stomach, and I'm getting a little bit lightheaded. And typically I got all these names in my head. Sergio Olivia, yeah. They were such impressive physiques, right? But they were using anabolics, but it was mostly Dianabol. It was mostly Dianabol. Now, looking at Serge Nubret, or Nubret, as it's spelled, it seemed like he might have had his hands on some equipoise, right? Or even some. I don't even think Primobolan was around then, but I think equipoise has been around in some form or another for quite a long time, and as long as veterinarian applications and uses were employed, right? And you got to understand that they had to have certain trials, so they probably did have unregistered human trials going on. This is a time when all these documentations and all this sort of vetting and data sets could just disappear. You know, how does it work on humans? Is it pound for pound, you know? And then, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger never talks about his Austrian origins, his brown shirt daddy, who joined up instantly in 1938 to follow before the SS was even created, right? So he got a big chunk of money when his daddy died. And he probably even got some sort of recompense. And then his brother died, and his nephew actually works successfully in the Hollywood area in promotions. That's really weird. Working for the very people who are behind many fuck ups, like Michael Jackson's hair getting burned. You can do your research on this. It's really fucking crazy how this just all loops back around. But these people weren't doing things that were out of the ordinary, and they may seem like it, but little by little, day by day, you can morphologically, with intensity and with the proper recovery, you can morphologically change and shift your body. And you really have to focus on your base. And I was telling this kid who looks like he's just starting out and trying to put on a good platform, but I just see him doing all these reps, right? And if you follow the diagrams, it's not going to do you any justice. You're going to have to eat a lot of oatmeal, right? You're going to have to eat a lot of rice, a lot of chicken, and you're going to need to eat things like beef liver, and nobody's going to tell you that. Nobody's going to tell you how you can cheaply, effectively. So you want to, when you're young and you're and you're underdeveloped, you'll do anything that you can, right, to put on some weight. And your body wants to stay efficient, effective, and lean. And you have to understand that the genetics that you're coming from, your body wants to survive and work. And if through your genetic history, you really had people who reached this place where they were more intellectual, or they became the master technicians in whatever service they were providing, they're not having to challenge themselves as much. And so really what I'm saying is the display of the physicality is a slave display, right? It's when the slave, like the whole John Henry thing, when John Henry gets out his fucking hammer and just goes, I'm gonna beat this machine. And then this whole art of techne comes into mind where it's like, holy shit, could he? Right? Could he beat the machine? And just the fact that the question exists and is suspended and hung there. But then what happens is that the steroid, the PED, the nano factors, the mechano factors that are going to invariably trump and take over the pet industry, and that work exclusively with the pancreas and will be stored in the body, right? And they are working on these things. You better believe it. It gets into insulin growth factors, working with the endocrine system, triggering certain responses through mimetics. That's where there's an implied or inferred chain of amino acids that trick your body into thinking that growth hormone is already being produced and excreted, right? So putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, but doing it through troughs and windows at specific time intervals that are based on slow wave sleep cycle. This is the first time that I've focused on building up, even when I had abused PEDs, like even 8 or 9 years ago, I hadn't even really been working out. Like I was really always using that after a lifetime career of reaching the status of a master class trainer, having worked for Equinox and 24 Hour and Club One and Bally's for short periods of time. I got bored. I didn't want to, I wasn't going to be a slave, you know? And I put up early videos on YouTube that would have received me many millions of views, probably in the tens or hundreds of millions, but I erased them because I started to see how the hubris was getting to me, but even more so, how there was this strange entity that seemed to be always pervading, always aware, always watching, and always trying to corrupt the individual. And I also saw that my son was under heavy attack. Every time I would come out with one of those videos, he would just go absolutely bonkers and crazy with what ended up becoming full-blown schizophrenia. But in the early days, it was connected at the hip to what I was doing. I was too early on. I was doing it back in 2007. I was shredded, and I was staying more on a gluconeogenic diet where I would just focus on, I was taking 600 to 700 grams of protein a day, and it wasn't hurting me at all. I was effectively living on protein, high quality protein. It was very expensive, but I discovered something. You know, I had discovered something. So naturally, I'm tapping into a lot of that history. And then on top of that, I wanted to understand, because I was so antithetical to my experience, my understanding. Though I'd looked into steroidogenesis at 41 years old, I'd never done them. So I studied and researched for many, many a months before I even, you know, made my first purchase. And then finally, I just was like, F it, let's do this, you know. Went on a TRT tech program, blew up from where I was, very lean, and gained like 65 pounds almost seemingly overnight. Like 7 weeks later, you could blink and see me walk through that door at 225 pounds. So just like boom, you know. And I hadn't even gotten started yet. I was a little scared because the amount of poundages and weights was already starting to really go against my personal philosophy of training. But I started tapping back into when I was a teenager, doing it naturally, and you know, doing a lot of T-bar rows and seeing the brachial radialis coming out really nicely. Um, the mid portion of the back, the rhomboids, right? The mid traps. And, back then it was just like bench, right? Everybody was focused on bench. But I ended up really favoring incline benches and oftentimes not even doing bench press at all. And I really believe that, like, if you really look at the chest, you're going to invariably start to try and do more fly movements and trying to get more fibers involved when you're going through and doing some pre-exhausting. So pullovers, heavy flies, but doing them with a lot of core stabilization and balance can keep you from having to go heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And then rotating the dumbbells, but don't get stuck to one modality. It's important though to get some sort of data set for yourself that you can rely on. And even more so, it's really impressive how your body will remember that. So if you did a routine for 6 to 10 weeks, right, that stuck to and adhered to certain principles, and it worked, you're going to be able to draw on that later and effectively, you could say it's a motor memory movement, but it's more than that because it taps into a time and an era that you don't think that you're in right now. But 20 years from now, you're going to be going, you'll be able to store that bit file information through kind of a Plutchik's wheel of emotionality. In other words, you'll be able to cue a feeling and a response and then get an entire program delivered to you. And new exercises will come to you, to your subconscious, without even really thinking about it. Like you'll go, I wonder if I kind of tailored this into my base program, right? The best growth you'll ever get is just by sticking with squats, a form of row. If you haven't done T-bar rows, I'd suggest getting into doing heavy T-bar rows and then basing this on a heavy duty Mike Mentzer type training, but not necessarily over accentuating the time under tension, but being able to manhandle weight. I think Larry Scott really does a great service on saying that you need to build your forearms up and your grip strength, right? Like focus on massive forearms and everything else will sort of echo out and you'll have this massive upper body, right? So T-bar rows are great. They'll really help you with this, especially if it's something that you're just doing at home, put a shirt up against the wall and understand that when you get too heavy, the back end is just going to lift off. So you're going to have to kind of balance it, You'll have to kind of mess around with it. Those heavy sandbags are good to have around, and I would suggest trying to get a really heavy duty one, duct taping that thing and getting like 110 to 120 pound, because they will come apart. It doesn't matter how fancy you think or how much canvas and double stitching is involved, it'll come apart. So understand your body, understand that's those joint systems where that sandbag comes apart. The same thing's happening with your body in building up as far as like the vector force, the moment arm. Understand these things, the resistive force, the class lever systems, right? To really start to get this, how one asymmetrical shift from muscular dominance is going to lead to issues or to fast recovery and adaptation. Like the core is always in the way. A weak core is always in the way of any power exercise, right? So in that sense, I think that probably, even if you have an elaborate setup at home, I think if you've got a place, you should, if you do have an elaborate setup, you've got a place to hang a suspension trainer. I'd actually put the weights away and start using the suspension trainer and even getting yourself a set of kettlebells, you know, and starting to do things like halos, focusing on your VO2 max, working in circuits and cycles with just basic 2-arm swings, and then starting to manhandle a specific weight that's very challenging for you, right? And then going into and learning how to do a proper clean snatch, right? Shoulder presses. Kettlebells are all about the shoulder articulation. You're not going to master your shoulders until you start to integrate those kettlebells from a naturalistic point of view. And if you are on PEDs, it's just going to throw your workout into an upper level. And then a weighted rope. That's how I train my clients. My clients were all in really good shape, better shape than me. They were richer. They could afford more. They could afford those sessions with me, so I made them count, you know? And if you eat a lot of rice, in fact, I got to start making my rice, so I'm going to do that right now. If you eat a lot of rice, which if you're putting on size, you should be. Wash this out. You're putting on a lot of water, okay? And you're gonna feel like you're fat. You're gonna feel like you're swimming in fat. But the truth is that I'm playing with. So at my lowest, I got down to about almost 163 pounds. Okay. I didn't actually weigh myself, but I was getting down there. And I know I was right around that area. And that was a new low for me because I realized that in the past, I was just shredded at first it was 165, 67, 165. I was just shredded. Then it went down to 163 pounds. And then later, obviously losing muscle mass, it went down even further. So right now, I'm gaining back some muscle mass that I'd lost some years back. But what I want to tell you is that once you build that base up, like when I was a teenager and I started this, going from 135 pounds up to 195 pounds, I would say I probably built my 165 pound lean muscle mass base, you know, at that point. And you have to be realistic about, again, your muscle attachments, your pronation angles. Even if you feel like you're huge, you probably got 12 pounds if you're bulking up and doing like what they call, you know, what is it called? A lean bulk, right? That's something a term that I heard when I was using ChatGPT. The terms change a little bit, but over the years. But this lean bulk is like, you're not really putting on body fat, but all that water is causing your body fat to really be amplified to where it almost looks like you've gained a lot of fat, but you're probably carrying 8 to 12 pounds of primarily water. So if you go from a really lean bulk, like I'm doing right now, back to into ketosis and gluconeogenesis, you're probably going to lose 8 to 12 pounds of primarily water to get dry again. I'm trying to max out how much rice I'm taking in here. I'll do 1 scoop of protein powder a day. I used to live on protein powder, and not unless you're super rich. Like if you get into using protein powder, then you better be willing to go into using other supplements, which you can do. So you can do this thing spending thousands of dollars a month, and if you have it, great. But you're not going to get any better results than what Mike Mentzer kind of laid out in his heavy duty training, right? To which I would say an argument for him and against him is that Nautilus was really pushing the negative aspect of, so you got to understand the time under tension, we've got that down these days with the use of suspension training, kettlebell work, and a lot of the core conditioning. That's another certification that I currently have for life, is I'm a core conditioning specialist, an advanced personal trainer. These are lifetime certifications I have. And then what will be expiring in 2038 is my PES and CES and Sharecare certifications. So I pretty much have lifetime certifications in those. So I'm like a lifetime certified master level trainer, right? And I've had over 20 certifications. I have worked side by side with people who are very, very educated in the areas of exercise science, and they didn't know jack fucking shit. When they had questions, they'd come to me. I was the top shit. I was the top trainer. Thus, a lot of people hated me. They didn't like me. And there was a lot of sabotage placed against me by very diabolical, low level, low amper type people. And for a long time, they were able to get away with this type of shit. But it's not the way it is anymore. Principles, particularly purity, and this is very important to understand purity, because when you get into principles, you have to begin to see how there is no division away from purity and pure principles. And it's particularly when you're trying to build your body up. Every thought that you have, everything that you eat, it becomes a kata. It becomes a religious mantra. You're not building yourself up to hurt people, but you could go into the martial art because you're going through the circumductive movements, and we haven't even gotten into that with mobility. Some people, from the pain and sacrifice of life, are having to focus more on the mobility aspect and the stabilization, and they should stay there their whole lives, and it'll keep them going. I've worked with people that had like a 78% apex in the dorsal spine. Yeah, I worked with somebody like that, and they required a great deal of rest. A great deal of rest. The diet has to be different. The 9 layers of the human body, one has to start asserting and focusing in on the nervous system as a primary directive, right? Not until a complete and total corrective reboot could be seen or made, but this is something where the genetics and the telomeres have to be addressed, right? That's why I called this biohacking on a shoestring, but I didn't even get into the areas or the subsets of what I studied years ago and what I began to understand, and what what an agenda was trying to keep me from manifesting. It's all centered around amino acids. It's all centered around Linus Pauling's conceptualization of orthomolecular science and nutrition, or nutritional science, which is still being sabotaged from the inside today. People really still don't understand it. It's as crucial as this whole thing about converting plastic into petrol or usable diesel, or being able to manifest petrol products from the plastics, right? Because to understand amino acids is to understand the very octave tones of healing within your body. And one of the best books that you can get is Heal with Amino Acids and Nutrients by Billy J. Saley. I talk about that. But it's going to give you that foundation, that foundational understanding, to where when you go study Elson Haas, Staying Healthy with the Seasons, right? Staying healthy with nutrition, you're going to understand Heal with Amino Acids and Nutrients much better. Because you'll see how the different colored vegetables represent. So this gets into like bioluminescence and a lot of other areas. And it's bizarre because it's like you'd think that everything I'm talking about is antithetical to someone like Cliff High, but then you see his use of amino acids, and it's like, no, he's talking about the same thing. Linus Pauling was talking about the same thing. And do you think in 1993, when all this shit was kicking off with Big Pharma, do you really think that he was a senile onset megalomaniac? No, he wasn't. He was 93 years old. and he was making a huge difference even then. And it's sad to say, because he should have been around for many more years. You know, he should have been around for many more years. But at the heart of all this is vitamin C, right? But I think that, honestly, I think what he may not have understood, and I could be wrong on this, because he lived there on the Big Sur coastline and probably did his fair share of hiking, I would think. But he might not have included that in with, high level, high volume walking and hiking is a must when you're focusing in on what you're taking in. And even more so, there's this strange interaction of phenomenon and noumenon, right? Where you begin to get into this otherworldly liminal place, right? That is an echo from what's going on with you internally, right? From an internal sense, with the amino acids, with the base of the nutrients that you take in, where there's an echo out and a wave pattern where you're affecting nature and the wildlife around you. Another way to look at this also, it's bizarre and it seems like it's going off on a tangent, but this is one of the weirdest studies I've ever looked at, and this goes back some years. I can't even give you site material on this, but they were studying tren, right, trembolin, and a breakdown process where nearby from a laboratory they had flushed out. It was probably a production factory. And I think somebody thought, we have the money, we have the ability to research this, let's fucking research it. And it was how tren broke down once it reached a natural state of decomposition. So they were studying the tren, right, itself, as it was exposed out into nature and washed out through this system, the septic system, right? And they were studying even further along as time went by and as degradation was supposed to take place, where they could find these amino acid signatures, or this trembolone, this steroid carbon-based ring, where they could find the degradation. And what happened is that the tren started to recombinate itself. So this gets into some really freaky areas, right? Where you look at amino acid signatures out in space, and you look at what, even more so, what works as a fork to support an amino acid structure, and that from a computational subset, i.e. steroidogenesis, that you see the hexamer rings, right? The pentose rings start to recombinate and try to reformat and come back into a semblance of order. So this is really harkens back to Konrad Zuse and Alan Turing, right? Is that life not only finds a way, it's directed mathematically and computational toward restructuring a way. So when you think about that, and then you look at the resilience of the human body, and you go, wow, exposure to natural sunlight becomes assaultive if somebody's state of mind is able to, through a wave pattern, echo out, into the ontology, and through the ontology to say, this is the resonant frequency of equilibrium, homeostasis. And that's when you see that eagle come out of the sky, or those red-tailed hawks come out of the sky and bop you on the head and fly back away. And it's like, I see you. Nature sees you. You see it. You're part of it, right? You don't go off and go, oh, that was, some woo-woo moment. You embrace it and you go, wow, Terrence McKenna was on to some shit, right? Like, I look at his form and I'm like, he kind of had the form of a yogi. And I'm like, I wonder if he was doing, you know, if he understood these mushrooms and he was kind of beginning to apply more of what Linus Pauling was getting at, but even Linus Pauling wasn't fully understanding or embracing it. We see this happen as one faction or one area of education sort of drifts into another. It's like, you know, you put peanut butter in my chocolate. No, you put chocolate in my peanut butter, right? And it's like the kid comes along and tastes and he's like, who fucking cares who put what in what? This shit's delicious, right? But why is it delicious? You're putting fat and carbohydrate together, right? It's the very thing that if you want to exercise any sort of principles, you need to learn that becoming insulin sensitive and separating those two agents is entirely necessary, right? And you're not going to get fat. You're going to feel like you're getting fat when you just switch over to a shit ton of carbohydrates, right? And you may swear, no, I'm fat. And it's like, no, you're not fat. You're just ubiquitous. You're just filled with water. You're just fluid, right? This is what massive amounts of carbohydrates do. They are a PED. Like when you take this on and you're taking in 6, 7, 800 grams of carbohydrates in a day, right? Like I've been doing, you're going to be washed out. But not until you take in that fat are you going to actually get fat. You know, your insulin levels are primed up, your glucose is going crazy, but as long as you're listening to your body and training, walking all day, like right now as I'm doing this, I'm walking. That's what I'm doing. I'll be going in the other room. I'm trying to figure out what muscle groups I got left. I know I got my abs left, so I'll be training that. I know I want to train legs, and I know I have the energy to do that. So I'm going to do that, but I really focused on my back yesterday, shoulders, and I threw a little bit of chest in there, you know, and I'm trying to, this goes back to the way I trained for a long time. I always throw a little chest in there unless my pectoral ties are really sore to the point where I just can't do it. I'll take a break, but I go into these pressing movements no matter what. I always finish everything. It's just a signature of mine. It's like the triceps and the chest and the front delts are such a integral, vital aspect of how my body moves and those movement patterns, and it charges me and it allows me to do other things, right? But I'm doing those other things and I'm not allowing like a sort of pushing, pressing dominance, protraction dominance to occur. Right, I'm doing just as many pull-ups, just as many chin-ups, just as many rows, right? And then my core, I was doing mad core to where I couldn't even really breathe for about 5 weeks. My core was so weak, I didn't realize how weak my transverse abdominis had gotten, my quadratus lumborum, like a lot of the core supportive muscles, wrapping around into my spine. You know, my spinalis, my erector spinae, and getting into the lats and the rhomboids, all those muscles were weakened, you know, and I'm still working on them. But with the suspension trainer and a pull-up bar, I've got everything I need. And even more so, what I realized doing primarily dips, pull-ups, and leg raises, that was pretty much it too, and high volume walking. I didn't realize how good a shape you could get in just primarily doing those exercises. That dips really were going to work all your entire chest and your triceps and so forth. And when you threw some pre-fatigue methods in there, when you changed the order of how you did those 3 exercises, or even more so got into doing push-ups and things like this. I'm just getting to the place now where I could comfortably do sets of single arm push-ups, which are really intense for me. Like, because I put so much into a set, not until those are like a mark of my conditioning and balance throughout, because they're such a global systemic exercise where your sartorius is firing, right? You're getting that cross bridge work, that that core, it really is like pillar, even though you're down in a push-up position, all those pillar supportive muscles in the anterior are firing off. And then supporting that, the posterior are also trying to stay in balance from your semitendinosus, your popliteal plantaris, all the way down to your heels, right? And all those muscles, including your anterior tibialis, are involved in a single arm push-up. And then you're sinking that in with, your intra-abdominal pressure to time that specifically, to innervate a good solid core response, right? So I may be working on those a little bit today as well as I'm doing my lower body. We're just cooking up some rice. I'll tell you that oatmeal with the sugar really kicked it off for me today. And I think oats and rice are going to be a good staple, and even combining those at times might be something that I'm doing. I was thinking about doing that today. I feel really leaned out today. So as you're taking in more calories, you're going to look like you're just getting fat. Okay? And as you do this, your body having adequate calories to build muscle tissue up. And, to some extent, this heavy duty Mike Mentzer training, he'll get into this a little bit with you. You can go over those numbers. You can look at more modern assessments of what's really happening there. The thermic caloric burn that's caused by new muscle, and really you're not getting new muscle. It's really hard to go through that state. You're just increasing the storage amount and volume and density of your pre-existing muscle cells, right? So, but you are able to increase your mitochondrial count, and you are able to supply more blood flow, capillary bed density to supply to the musculature. And depending on how intense you are focused on this, well, creatine's really going to help establish this. Many, many studies have been done over years and years, and you want to get that capillary bed density down as quickly as possible, and you don't want it to be, ephemeral. You want to be able to solidify this even in times where you're having to drop off your training a little bit, right? To be able to just come right back in a couple of weeks later and pick up where you left off. That's vital. It's vital that you're able to go through the adaptation process eventually. After a good long year and a half of training, you should be able to walk away for a couple of weeks and come back even stronger with a stronger base. It's deceiving because you'll come back and you go, oh, it looks like I lost 5 pounds, on this exercise or that exercise. And then what you're not realizing is you're going, no, you actually gained. You're just starting in on a new cycle where 3 weeks from now, you're going to be 15, 25 pounds up on a particular lift. So that time walking away is crucial. It's very important. Bizarre how my arms are just growing and I don't have any weights around me at all. Like, the suspension trainer is really just, I think, the most amazing piece of technology, and it's not even technology. It's like, but it is. We are the technology. We are the machine. That is like part of the TRX mantra. But like, to think that you could take some ancient fucking window cover that's made out of a high tensile strength type canvas and turn it into something that you could do rows off of and chest presses and even, ring patterns, right? with fucking textile drapery shit. It shows how there really is no specific modality that's one is separate from the other. Years ago, what I wanted to do with my time is I wanted to produce master artistry and craftsmanship of beautiful resistance training equipment that could be actually put as furniture in someone's house. That was something that I really thought I would be doing for many years, but I never got to the place where I had the type of equipment or leisure time to be able to do that. But that's, if I was able to, if I didn't live in this feudalistic system and have to sacrifice myself and deal with all the bullshit that is so superfluous and ridiculous, right? With all these weird esoteric programs that are being played out on people, and how people steal your place and take away your destiny. It's just such a bizarre world. But I would have made many, many contributions in the ways of nutritional science, and tried to. Even with my lack of education, I was affecting a great many people. You know, I had a lot of very wealthy people that were my clients that I would put on a base program where they're like, I'm eating like a peasant, but I feel amazing. It's like, yeah, you don't need to be eating filet mignon and expensive bottles of wine. It's not going to help you, man. You know, and you're going to end up craving other things and wanting other things, right? And so that peasant's way of thinking, it brings a level of humility in. Even more so, it makes you wonder why you're stacking up all this needless, ridiculous wealth when you could be affecting the multitudes with this. Like, the odd thing is that you're going to try to, you know, as you get more monetarily successful, you're going to start trying to overthink things, and you're really trying to think of ways, honestly, to where you don't have to help the very people that need help. But what I always envisioned is being able to cook up, almost, I pictured this, but it's not necessarily the way, right? Things should be done more sanitarily than this, but it is a way where you just are cooking up this cauldron of fresh foods, high quality foods, and you have these ultra wealthy people sitting right next to seemingly homeless people that are on this program where they're resetting themselves. They're eating like peasants, and they're getting an amazing physical condition and shape and mental clarity, to where it's kind of like, hey, we're having a conversation together and we're clicking in. This guy that I thought that was a complete and total drug addict, he served, you know, in the military, or he went to school and dropped out, or something happened here. And it's like, we're actually transcending time, you know, going back 25, 30 years and having a conversation that we could have and should have had. But because we're here at this dinner table, both eating for free through a project that we both put in sweat equity into, here we are getting healthy, training, eating properly, and realizing it's not that complex. And not until we get to a place like that are we ever going to see any glory, unification through harmony and harmonization, because that is harmony. You know, when you think, oh, that's humanitarian, that would be great, that's such an egalitarian effort. And it's like, then you look out at nature and you see that if a crocodile's not hungry and an antelope comes up and licks right in front of him, it's not going to attack. Its impulse isn't just to kill, right? There's a point, there's a congruence, there's a harmony there. And we want to capture all the violence, all the negative, all the bad times, but we don't see the semblance of order, nor are we attracted to it. And it's not entertaining, it's not fun, but it is the most entertaining. It's depicted as in these, you know, ghetto style parks where you got these people playing chess. It's like, oh, that's such an anomaly, wow. You don't have to play chess. You don't have to think divisively. You don't have to play such a ridiculous and stupid game that makes people like Bobby Fischer completely nuts and ineffectual in every other way. These people are not entertaining. The game is not entertaining. It's ridiculous. It doesn't exemplify higher level thought. Philosophers aren't coming out of the mix here. Computer science isn't coming out of the mix here. Nothing's coming out of it. No peace is coming out of it. It's just a stupid fucking game of a limited scope that is limiting vectors and scholars and class systems that are actually keeping people from understanding the very science of our world, right? And it's assaultive. All the way down to the king and queen and the pawns. It's ridiculous. Life doesn't work like that.